Okay, we're recording.
All right, well, it's my hope today that we're just going to begin a general kind of overview and we can go from there. Let me start by showing some very basic photographs from the global African experience. You can interrupt anytime and we'll save about, I hope to do it for about an hour today. And I can show pictures for 30 or 40 minutes and then we can leave the last 20 minutes or so for any questions or commentaries. And if you want to interrupt at any time with a question or comment, please feel free to do so. You're free to record it. You can post it on Facebook. You can post it on YouTube. You can share with other people if you like. Ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
For those who don't know, my name is Runoko Rashidi. I'm a historian and anthropologist, and this is what I do. So let's see if we could just pull up the photographs and see what happens.
How old are you, doctor?
I'm 66 years of age. I live in Southern California, African-American, author, traveled to much of the world, 125 countries, lectured in 67, and I'm the author or editor of 22 books, right?
Wow. I've only written one.
Well, one is more than most people ever write, so congratulations for that.
I'm about to write my second one. Hope you'll write the forward to it.
We'll see, we'll see. Okay, now you just need to enable me.
How do I do that?
Me, somewhere on your computer or in Zoom, there should be a button that makes me a host or co-host. Only you can do that. You would either enable me or make.
Have you ever done it on Zoom?
Not personally, no. I respond to Zoom presentations. People set them
up. What are you trying to do now?
You're going to make me either a host, a co-host, or you're going to enable me. You see, when I pull up this screen, this is what I get. Host disabled, participant screen sharing. I need to be able to share the screen. So there'll be something on your end.
I'm gonna have to look on YouTube and Google it, I think.
All right.
There you go. Try it now.
That's it. All right, now it's on me, and I'll go to this photograph, and you should be able to see that on the full screen.
I can see it.
So you should be able to see me and you.
Yes, sir.
The image itself. So I don't know how long this is going to take. I suspect it's going to take a lot longer than 30 or 40 minutes. So this will just be the introduction. Okay. And I know that at least we'll be able to cover a significant amount of the African origins of humanity and civilization, and also to focus, at least to some extent, on Nile Valley civilization. If we have time, we'll go around the world altogether. If not, perhaps we can do that in the next session. But remember, this is just the beginning. So we'll call this African History 101. This is a coral cavern that I entered into in Zanzibar, Tanzania in May 2018. I'd led a group to Ethiopia and Kenya, and I wanted to get off on my own and do something just for myself, a bit of a holiday, and also, to learn something new. I thought I knew a lot about what is called the transatlantic slave trade, but it wasn't the only one. In the South Pacific, you have something called blackbirding. In the 19th century, you have the Indian Ocean trafficking in African people. You have the Saharan trafficking in African people. In other words, African people being kidnapped and taken to dungeons and then dispersed to various parts of the world. But you also have what is called the East African slave trade. Now, this was abolished by the British in June 1873. but the Omani Arabs, the Arabs from Oman and the Persian Gulf, found it to be very profitable. And so they kept it going. But since the British had the big stick in this part of the world, the Arabs had to hide the Africans that they had captured. And this is one of the places they hid them. It's made up, it's a natural coral cave, a coral cavern. And coral is a sharp, edgy kind of stone. I went down there in a pair of rubber-soled sandals, and it, shredded the bottom of the sandals, the soles. I would imagine the Africans who were taken there were barefooted. So we can only imagine what happened to their feet. So I walked all the way down using the guardrails, came around this side, and I was just about to, with some reluctance, go deeper into the cavern. And the brother that brought me there insisted that I stop. It was too dark, too uneven, and too dangerous. Just pitch darkness. You could see water dripping from the cave, from the ceiling. Remember, it's coral. And then also you can see bats flying around. So for a long time, these are the kind of places that our ancestors were kept. And I came back out into the light. And so I use this photograph a lot of times to begin my presentations, because I think that symbolically, or maybe the word would be metaphorically, this is the kind of cavern that we are trying to come out of in our minds in respect to the history of African people. It's as though we're coming out of a void into the light. So I like to begin with that. And then this is also very, very key, that we should never begin the history of African people with enslavement. And this says it all. I'm going to tell my children, my youth, my kids, my young scholars, their story does not begin with slavery. Kwame Ture, who was a mentor of mine, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, used to say, if you think your history began with slavery, the best you will hope to be is a good slave. A great scholar, John Henry Clark, likes to say, or like to say, that if you think your history began with slavery, everything since then will look like progress. So we never want to start there. Now, this is not by any means to diminish the suffering of our ancestors, but this is to say that we are not going to begin at this point in our history. And even when we do talk about it, we're going to talk also about resistance to enslavement. So these are very, very important tenets. Now, here I am standing in front of a statue in Washington, D.C. with Dr. Carter Godwin Woodson, who in 1926 and 1916 founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, or shortly before that, and then began the publication of the Journal of Negro History that year, 1916. I think he started actually the association in September 1915. In 1926, he began virtually single-handedly, at least he's given the credit for it, Negro History Week. In 1976, it was expanded to Black History Month. And so we always say that we have the greatest story that's barely been told, and we want to tell it every day, all day, 24/7. These are just some of the early historians. It's very important to acknowledge that we didn't begin this process, that this has been going on for a very long time. And also, I think it's important to acknowledge Black women in history, and also to acknowledge African women historians. This is one of the most famous. Her name is Drusilla Dunjee Houston. In 1926, she produced a book called Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire, where she talked about the Nile Valley roots of civilization and the spread of Nile Valley roots to other parts of the world. So this is Miss Drusilla Dunjee Houston. I believe that she was born in 1876, and I think she died in 1941 in Phoenix, Arizona. And of course, this is the preeminent scholar from Africa itself. This is the great Sheikh Anta Diop, born in 1923, December 29th in Senegal, and died, I think, on February 6, 1987, or perhaps it was February 7, 1986. His focus was largely on Nile Valley civilizations. And it's a shame that so many of these sisters and brothers spent their lives trying to prove what I think is pretty obvious, and that ancient Egypt was African. Egypt is in Africa, has always been in Africa. I suspect it always will be. And the people that built the pyramids, the tombs, and the temple were African people. They were Black people. Check on to Job's biggest, first outstanding work. It's called African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality. It was published in the United States under that title in the mid-1970s. It was originally published under the title in French, Negro Nations and Culture. It created a sensation. It showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that, as I pointed out, ancient Egypt was African. And that was intended to be his PhD, it was his PhD dissertation from Sorbonne University in Paris, the most prestigious university in France, I guess kind of like the Harvard of France, and it was rejected for his PhD dissertation. And then he came up with another one not long after that. That's called The Cultural Unity of Black Africa. Similar kinds of themes, also rejected. Finally, in 1960, with the publication of a book called Pre-Colonial Black Africa, he finally got his PhD. He went back to Africa, went back to Senegal, and set up a radiocarbon laboratory where they could actually date organic matter. This one I simply call the quartet. This is a photograph by a local brother named Charles Aggie Ogborn. And this I call the quartet. That's what I call it. And here you can see four of our greatest scholars. The man right here is Dr. John Henry Clark, who we've already talked about, preeminent in his field. Next to him in the red bow tie is Dr. Chancellor James Williams, the author of the book, a seminal work, Destruction of Black Civilization. Standing is Joseph Alfredo Antonio Benyakanen, a noted Egyptologist who also wrote about the African roots of Nile Valley civilization. And then the light-skinned brother next to him, sitting down, is Professor John G. Jackson, who talked about a lot of very similar themes. The author of a book called Man, God, and Civilization, Was Jesus Christ a Negro? Introduction to African Civilization. So in the 1970s, earlys and early 90s, these were the titans, you might say, of African-centered research in the United States. And they had a huge influence and shaped a whole generation. Now, this is yours truly right here. I'm a student, you might say, of all of those men. And one of the things that I try to do is I try to make my information very broad. In other words, I believe that I can do a presentation for anyone, whether it be for children, who I think, is the key. That's the future. If we grab hold of them, I think we got it. But virtually any kind of audience. I use a lot of photographs, very, very important, with the maxim that seeing is believing, and hopefully a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here I am with my major mentor, I guess you might say. And this is Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Ivan Van Sertima was born in Guyana, I believe in January 1935. He lived in Africa doing field research in Tanzania. He lived in the UK. I believe he lived for a short time in Eastern Europe. He moved to the United States about 1975 or so. He taught at Princeton and Rutgers, these Ivy League schools, around 1977. He produced a book. It was actually published by Random House called They Came Before Columbus, the African Presence in Ancient America. It is still regarded by many as a controversial book. The thesis was that African people didn't first come to the Americas as captives, that they came thousands of years ago. It impacted in Central and South America, classical Mesoamerican civilization. And that's what is the primary theme or focus, thesis, he might say, of the book that came before Columbus. It's sensational, and I still think it's the most comprehensive book and the best book on the subject that's been written. I would love to see it updated. And here I am with him This is in the very early 1980s. Dr. Ivan Van Sertima and his protege, Runoko Rashidi. Here's one of my more, yes.
What are you trained as? What do you have degrees in?
I have honorary doctorate degrees in divinity and history. Okay. I'm a historian and an anthropologist. Here's one of my more recent works. I try to put a lot of emphasis, as I say, on photographs. And I do think that the pictures more or less speak for themselves. All of my life, I felt like that. And for the last 10 years in particular, I have tried to focus largely on artifacts in the museums. I think that there are enough artifacts in the museums to, in large measure, reconstruct the entire history of the African world. And this is one of my more recent books, beautiful cover, Black and Beautiful in the Ancient World. Also,
where can we buy your books?
You can buy my books on my website. You know, and the website is drrunoko.com, drrunoko.com. A person can write me, runoko@hotmail.com, and I'll send you the link. Okay. But the easiest thing to do is go right to the website. You can pay via Cash App or PayPal. It's not complicated. You can even pay for it with a credit card. This is one of my works from last year. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I still have boxes of these calendars. Now, these aren't just calendars. These are little small books in and of themselves. Each of the 12 months of the year, there's a Nile Valley king, and there's a biography of that king. At the beginning of the book, there's an essay on the African roots of Nile Valley civilization and beautiful original photographs. That's the kind of work that I do.
I want one. How much are they?
They're $10 plus the mailing charges. So it's no problem. I'd be happy to send you one. Now, these are some of Ivan's works. There's a book that I was talking about. The African presence in ancient America that came before Columbus. But also, maybe his most important work in many ways is the book that you see up above, and that is Blacks in Science, Ancient and Modern. A lot of Africans, including African Americans, don't run to science, they run from it. And what Dr. Van Sertima endeavors to show, and I think effectively, is that science originated in Africa, or maybe it'd be more accurate to say that Africans were the first scientists. And there's still a scientific tradition in the African community, even in the United States, whether it be George Washington Carver or Charles Drew or Ernest Everett Just, or even the Sisters in Hidden Figures. A lot of Ivan Van Sertima's work also focused on Nile Valley civilization. You can see two of his anthologies here. I contributed to all of these, Egypt, Child of Africa, and Egypt Revisited. If you can get these books, I highly recommend them, even now. They are kind of collector's items, not necessarily easy to find. Just taking a pause. And then in the center is another very, very important book, and that is The Golden Age of the Moor. It's the most comprehensive book on the Moors there is. So what we have here are four very important themes. One, Blacks in science. We've already talked about that. Marcus Garvey used to say that we need to develop a race of scientists second to none. And then we have on the other side that came before Columbus. Now, this is very difficult for a lot of people to stomach. It's my belief that as long as we stay in our lane, quote unquote, and we're talking about sports or athletes, entertainers, rappers, politicians, we're kind of safe. That is how African American, that's how Black History Month in the United States is more or less structured. It begins in 1619, as though we didn't have a history before then. So here's a man who says not only did African people come to America before Columbus, but African people played a fundamental role in classical American civilization And the most spectacular aspect of that is the Olmec civilization. Why? The Olmec civilization is important to us because it's the parent civilization of the Americas. And Ivan Van Sertima did not say, and I'm not saying that it was an African civilization. We both agree that it was a Native American civilization, even though we need to talk about who the Native Americans were at that time. But that at a crucial juncture in Olmec civilization, perhaps 3,000 years ago, a small group of Africans appeared, perhaps a fleet of ships thrown off course, caught in a current that ended up in the Americas, sailing from Africa. And those Africans exerted a tremendous influence on classical American civilization. The Olmec come before the Inca, the Maya, the Aztec, the Toltec, the Moche, etc. Okay. And then Egypt. The African roots of Nile Valley civilization is still, for whatever reason, hotly debated. The reason, I think, is because modern Egyptology began at the height of the transatlantic slave trade, and Africans are being captured and taken out of Africa by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, every year. In order to make a slave, you must take away, we would think, their history. And the greatest aspect of ancient African history of civilization would be Nubia and Egypt, would be Sudan and Egypt, Nile Valley civilization, okay? And then in the center, of course, are the Moors who brought Europe out of the Dark Ages after the fall of the Roman Empire. And all of these areas now are still contested. There's a Fox News host who commented on some social commentary by LeBron James. And she basically said, just shut up and dribble. My point is, as long as African American and African scholars only talk about slavery and the aftermath of slavery, no problem. You can get a museum done. You can make a movie, you can get a grant. But when you begin to talk about African people who had an impact on civilization, African roots of humanity itself, you run into fierce opposition. And Ivan Van Sertima certainly encountered that. Did you have a question or comment?
What's the Sphinx name in African?
The Great Sphinx. Remember, there are many sphinxes. The word sphinx is a Greek term. In Africa, what are called sphinxes, at least in the Nile Valley, tend to have the bodies of lions and the head of the monarch. You even have the heads of women atop some of the sphinxes in the Nile Valley. Now, the biggest one, the Great Sphinx, is called Heru Makhet, Herumakhet. And that basically means Heru on the horizon, Heru being a manifestation of the sun. So that is what you're looking at here.
Heru was the first Messiah, the first Christ, right?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. It's from the word Heru that we derive the word hero. But to call Heru the first Christ, I don't know if I would say that's accurate. You do have the creation story in which Asar or Osiris and Aset and Isis, Aset or Isis, are the parents of the child Heru, who is born of a virgin birth and an immaculate conception. And and his mission primarily is to avenge his father's murder. His father Asar had been murdered by his uncle Set. And so Heru's mission was to avenge his murder and reclaim or gain his legacy. And he grows up and he engages in a series of battles. And apparently this becomes the basis of the labors of the young Hercules. And so
did Heru walk on water, turn water to wine, and raise the
Heru is a mythical figure. He wasn't a real figure. And not a real person.
I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the Sphinx. But is that water around the Sphinx in the picture?
That's water, but remember, that's just an artist's depiction. That's not reality.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. More questions about that?
No.
All right. Here's my own book for beginners, children. That's my daughter there, Sada Garvey, and me on a cruise ship on the Nile in 2016. I try to make my work, as I pointed out, child friendly, but adults, anybody, I try to structure it to whoever I'm speaking with. Now, these images right here take us to the African roots of humanity. Humanity, according to the concept of evolution that I embrace, and I do embrace it. I don't think there's any doubt about it. It doesn't say that we come from monkeys or apes. It says that monkeys and apes and humans have a common ancestor. And I have no doubt that evolution is real, although we're learning more about the specifics every day. So this right here is a reconstruction of what scientists believe the first modern human looked like, which we call Homo sapiens sapiens, or wise man. And this is a reconstruction of a set of bones found in Morocco, believed to be 160,000 years old. He looks a lot like the rapper 50 Cent. And here's a similar one, more recent, because one of the things that we want to emphasize is that modern humans spread out of Africa before slavery. We're very clear about that. This is a reconstruction of bones found in using DNA analysis now. A lot of these are being reconstruction and re-envisioned. Re-envisioned. This one is from Romania. This is about 34,000 years old. This is a team from the BBC, and this is Eastern Europe. And this is a reconstruction of what is called Cheddar Man. Cheddar Man is reconstructed fossils, or let's do it another way. Let me hydrate. Cheddar is a site, as I understand it, in northern England. And around 1904, a set of bones were found, and they've recently been reconstructed with the help of DNA. And this is what the ancestor of the British looked like. Okay, this is Cheddar Man, a heavily melanated person. Today we would call him a black person with straight hair and light-colored eyes. And here's a similar one from the Americas, specifically Brazil. This is Lucia, named after Lucy. Lucy is the name given to an early species that predates modern humans called Australopithecus afarensis. The African name is Dinknesh, which means you are wonderful. In the 1980s, a set of bones were found in Brazil, and they were of a woman. The pelvic area was intact. Apparently, the skull was intact, and it was also reconstructed, and she is called Lucia, and this is Lucia. So you have a number of these. There's the actual skull, and again, a reconstruction in the skull. This is another one from Brazil, nicknamed Antonio, and this is a reconstruction of an African man whose bones were found, who lived 10,000 years ago. And so we can conclude by saying that for most of the history of the world, Black people were the only people. Until a few thousand years ago, it would seem that the entire world consisted of Black people, and non-Black people are here only recently. Be very clear that there's only one race, and that's the human race, which began in Africa and went out and peopled the rest of the world. Now, these are the basics. What have we covered so far? The importance of history. The more you know about your history, the more liberated you are. Somebody said, what you know about yourself depends on what you think of yourself. And what you think of yourself depends on what you have been told. How does it go? What you know about yourself depends. Anyway, the bottom line is history is important, that strong people run the world, that weak people don't. And that we must emphasize our history all the time, that African people are the only ones that can effectively write African history, that we must tell it unapologetically, without stuttering, without stammering, without whispering, that for most of the history of the world, African people, Black people were the only people, that there's only one race, and that's the human race, which originated in Africa. And that all of us have, whether we like it or not, an African ancestor. So the key is to begin to unlock the mysteries, you might say, of Africa. I think a lot of us grew up with the idea that Africa is the worst place it ever was and don't want to have anything to do with it. So now this is a way of introducing myself a little bit. As I say, I'm a historian and an anthropologist. I travel all over the world, at least I did before the pandemic shut it down. And here I am on the in Western Uganda, on the border with Democratic Republic of the Congo, with the people who are known as the Pygmies. Their name is Batwa, or simply Twa. And these are maybe the most ancient people in the world. This is in Western Uganda, doing some field studies. And I visited most of the archaeological sites in the world, a lot of them not in Africa. This is at Pompeii. This was on my 60th birthday. But mostly what I've been doing the last 10 years in particular, as a way of completing my introduction, is spending a lot of time in the museums. As I think I said, I've been doing so many presentations, it is Black History Month, that there are enough artifacts, I believe, in the museums to, in large measure, reconstruct the entire history of the African world. Here I am in the Musée du Louvre in Paris. Most of the great museums of the world, I think we can say great, are actually repositories of loot. And they are, most of them are in Europe, because at one time, as you know, particularly in the 19th century, the Europeans ran the world, and they could do basically whatever they wanted to do. They could take what they wanted to. And in the museums are their trophies. The idea of putting things on display reflects a level of conquest and superiority. In some cases, it extended in the 19th and 20th centuries to actually putting people on display. Anyway, this is in the Musée du Louvre, one of the best museums in Europe, in the world. And this is in the British Museum, so in London. So you have the French and the British who took the most and the best. And those, the best and the most of those artifacts are in the Louvre in Paris and in the British Museum in London. But there are also many other significant museums in those countries. In England, for example, you have the Petrie Museum, named after William Matthew Flinders Petrie, the preeminent British Egyptologist. And it's just a few blocks in the British Museum. You have the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford University. You have the Fitzwilliam Museum at Cambridge. You have the museums in Edinburgh, in Ireland, and Wales. And France, too, has significant museum collections in Marseille, in Lyon, all over the country, okay? But those are the two most significant. Now, this one takes us to Belgium, and I'm gonna end soon. This, before we even get to Nile Valley civilization, is important. This is called the Ishango bone. And the Ishango bone is important to us because it's an ancient African counting stick. Notches are carved on the surface of the bone in sequential order. The date we're not sure about, but we think it's about 25,000 years old. And I think it's a baboon fibula. You can see notches carved on the surface of the bone in sequential order. This is found in Central Africa. When I do presentations, I typically ask people, what do you think of when you think of Africa? And several things come to mind. People will always tell me wild animals, poverty, and disease. And I begin to say, do you know Africa is where the first people came from? Africa is where people first stood on 2 feet. Africa is where people first domesticated fire. Africa is where people first had art and buried the dead and played music and had mathematics and charted the stars in the heavens. and morality and religion. So rather than running from Africa, I want African Americans in particular to begin to embrace their African heritage. One thing Black people tend to agree upon, if nothing else, is that Black folk need to unite, we need unity, we need to come together, etc. But we rarely talk about what the basis of that unity would be. And I'm thinking that history, knowledge of self, can be that thing, or at least one of the important things that all people, I think, no matter how light skinned they are, how dark skinned they are, how tall they are, how short they are, whether they're Muslims or Christians or Yoruba or Ifa or Rasta, or they practice Condomble or Santeria, that all people, male or female, want to feel proud of themselves and that they come from something greater than themselves. And so his story has to become our story. So this is the Ashango bone, and I'll just show a few more. African, one of the things I'm working on these days is African involvement in STEM, in science, technology, et cetera, mathematics, medicine, African background to science. This is an astronomical observatory. It's at a place called Nabta Playa, or it's from Nabta Playa. This is right at the border between Sudan and Egypt. These stones have been moved and put in the courtyard of the Nubian Museum in Aswan. This is an astronomical observatory in Africa, more than twice the age of the much more famous Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain in the UK. And then, of course, we began to talk, and this is where I'm going to stop now. Just a few more images. We began to talk about Nile Valley civilization. Ivan Van Sertima used to say, Runoko, it's one thing to say that you were first, but now we want to talk about what we did, meaning classical civilization, the use of metal weapons and tools, writing systems, agricultural science, urbanization, etc. And this seems to begin in the Nile Valley. And this is one of the examples of that. Early examples, this is of the Tasseti incense burner. Tasseti was an early kingdom in what is now called Nubia. You have different areas of the ancient Nile Valley. The Nile Valley starts in the center of Africa, in the Great Lakes region, and goes north. And along the banks of the river, as we reach Sudan and Egypt, great and mighty cities develop. The greatest kingdom, or the earliest kingdom that we know of, is called Tasseti, which means the land of the bow, as in bow and arrow. And this is an incense burner. They burn incense there. And on the side of it, you can't see it clearly here. I'm sorry, this is the way it's positioned in the museum, is a man seated on the throne. And it would appear to be the first monarch in history. And then here's a cheesy little map of Egypt. You can see the river in the center, which is the key, called Happy, or the Nile. It begins in Central Africa. You have two major branches of it. One is called the White Nile, which begins in the area of Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, what's called the Great Lakes region. And then you have, coming out of Ethiopia, the Blue Nile. And north of Khartoum, these two rivers combine and they flow north and finally empty into the Mediterranean Sea, 4,196 miles. It is one of the few major rivers in the world where the river begins in the south and flows into the north. Most rivers, like the Mississippi, for example, I could be wrong, and I think the Amazon as well, flow from north to south. And along the banks of the rivers, great and mighty cities developed. You can see the Mediterranean in the north, and then the body of water on the east is the Red Sea. And then you can see that most of Egypt, the Nile Valley itself, is composed largely of desert, and that is the Sahara. Now here's where the two rivers combine, north of Khartoum, Sudan. Most of the photographs that you're gonna see are my own photographs, and you can see where the Blue Nile and the White Nile come together. And then this one, just a few more. I hope we've set the tone. This is called the Scorpion King. I believe his name is Selkit or Serkit. And he's called the Scorpion King because you see the king here with the scorpion right in front of his face. This is at the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford University. And this king takes us to the end of the pre-dynastic period. If you want to understand Nile Valley history, the key is the dynasties. A dynasty is a family of rulers, one member of the family coming after the other for an extended period of time. And in Egypt, there are 30 royal families. This is where we're going now, Egypt. The indigenous name for Egypt is Kemet. It means the black city or the black community. It's sometimes called the Two Lands because there was a kingdom in the southern part of the country and a kingdom in the northern part of the country. And it's sometimes called the Beloved Land, meaning Tameri, T-A-M-E-R-I or M-E-R-R-Y. And finally, it's also known as Mishram in the Bible. So this is the Scorpion King and his reign over 5,000 years ago marks the transition between the pre-dynastic period and the dynastic period. And then you have these combs, these Afro pigs. This tells you pretty much who the people were. We have eyewitness accounts that saw the people and described them as having black skin and woolly hair. We have linguistic analysis that tells us that these are African people. You have biblical accounts that says that Mishram or Egypt was a child of Ham. Ham is regarded as the biblical progenitor of humankind, the black biblical progenitor of humankind. You have linguistic evidence. You have an examination of the skeletal remains. And when all is said and done, Egypt is not only in Africa, but African people built ancient Egyptian civilization. And this is the first king of Kemet. And these are all figures from the early dynastic period. This one, for example, takes us to, and we're going to end here, the first golden age in history. And with this, beginning about 4,700 years ago, we find the construction of the world's first large stone buildings. And this one in particular is called the Step Pyramid, which is a tomb designed for his king by this man, Imhotep. I would say, if you want to know the name of one African, only one black person who lived before slavery, this is a good candidate. Imhotep is not a king. He is a scientist. He's the first scientist. He's a multi-genius before Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton. He designed that building I just showed you, the Step Pyramid. He's identified as the father of medicine. He's a writer. He is the prime minister of the country. He's a dentist. He's an astronomer. He's just a remarkable person. And I think that he is a wonderful role model, even now, for African people. So that's our first lesson. We've gone about 45 minutes, and we've covered over 100,000 years of history. And so now I'll leave it to you for any questions or comments.
Okay, do you want to sell your services real quick for people that want the same service that I'm getting?
Well, I wouldn't like exactly to put it that way, but anyone can contact me again at runoko@hotmail.com. Runoko is spelled RUNOKO@hotmail.com. You can go to my website for the books, if you want to make a donation, if you want to see about my tours, if you want my biography, et cetera, my classes. I do offer online lectures and presentations. It's DRUNOKO, drrunoko.com. Or a person can call me at area code 323-803-8663.
Okay, what about Mount Kenya and the Black Panther? Is that herb real?
I'm sorry?
The Black Panther herb, the purple herb. Have you seen the movie?
I saw the movie Black Panther. I don't remember any Black Panther herb, though.
There was a herb that they crushed up and they drank to give them power to see the ancestors.
Oh, I think that's fictional. I think that's just comic book.
Okay, I've heard that is real.
Maybe.
When are you going back to Africa? Can I come with you?
I hope to go back to Africa in July, August this year. with a trip to Ghana and a trip to Egypt. But so much just right now, Brother Clarence, depends on the virus. If it lets up and we're able to go, we'll go. For example, here's the protocol for Ghana. To go to Ghana, first of all, you need what's called a yellow fever vaccination. There's no ifs and buts about it. It lasts for 10 years. You needed that before the pandemic and you need it now. Now to go now, you also need the vaccination. Okay. And then you need to, this is as it stands now. And then you need to be tested within 72 hours from the time you go. And then when you get to Ghana, you're going to be tested again. And you have to pay for all of this now. And then when you get ready to go back to the United States, you have to be tested again. If you are tested positive, you're forced to quarantine in Ghana at your own expense for 14 days. So that's expensive, it's tedious. Egypt is a lot easier. Egypt, I'm not even sure if you have to have verification of the test. You don't need the yellow fever vaccination. You get a visa upon arrival. The visa is only about $20. Okay, so those are my plans, but a lot of it just depends on how the virus impacts us, and especially now that people are talking about these variants.
Have you been to Ethiopia?
I've been to Ethiopia, I believe 4 times. I've been to Egypt 25 times. I've been to Ghana 10 times.
Have you seen the temples, the Christian temples that are carved into the mountain?
Well, actually, there are churches. There are churches and monasteries, depending on the phase in Ethiopian history you go to. Here's how a typical tour to Ethiopia would be if I was structuring it. You're going to fly into Addis Ababa. Now, you've mentioned the cruise, but Ethiopia is a landlocked country. So even if you wanted to do a cruise, it wouldn't be practical. So somehow you would fly into Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa is the capital of Ethiopia. It was built in 1896. It means the new flower. So you fly into Addis Ababa, you would see you visit the National Museum. You see the reconstruction of Lucy, I talked about, Dinknesh, and do the museum, and you see the churches and what have you around Ethiopia. You get used to it. Ethiopia grows some of the best coffee in the world. You could do some shopping. And then you would go north. You would go north to Aksum. Aksum is the first great civilization of Ethiopia. And there you have these obelisks who look vaguely similar to the ones in Egypt. Okay. And then you would go to Lalibela. Lalibela is a town with a series of churches carved out of the rock. And the most famous one is the Church of St. George Beta Georges. This is where the Ethiopian emperors, at least some of them were coordinated. Haile Selassie was coordinated there. And it's spectacular. It's considered one of the new wonders of the world. The local people say it wasn't built by human beings. It was built by angels in 8 days. It's magnificent. And it's the #1 tourist attraction in Ethiopia. And then you would go to a place called Gondar. Gondar has more churches, not carved out of the earth like the ones at Lalibela. Lalibela was a king, by the way, and the town is named after him. So you go to the churches of Gondar, but also the palaces and castles of Gondar. Okay. And then there's another place called Bahadur, and you'll have monasteries and churches there. And this is also near the source of the Blue Nile River. So that's pretty much what you would see if you did a standard tour of Ethiopia, and that's what I do. And then if you wanted to, you could go into the south of Ethiopia. It's like a different country. And there you have what's called the Omo Valley. And the Omo Valley has a lot of very traditional people, who are very different from the ones in the north. So Ethiopia is a good tourist attraction in many ways. The infrastructure there is not as sophisticated as it is in Egypt, but nevertheless, Ethiopia has so much history, and history is so rich that it's really a rewarding visit.
When do you think you'll go back there?
I was going to go back this year, but there seems to be a little bit of governmental instability. And again, I don't know what the status of the virus is there. So probably not till 2022.
Okay, the last question. The dynasties that you talked about in Egypt or Kemet, how many thousands of years do you think that spans?
The pre-dynastic period goes so far back that we can't even measure it. It may be 20,000 years. The dynastic portion traditionally begins about 3100 BC. And this begins when kings from the southern part of the country come forth and subdue the kings in the north and usher in what's called the beginning of the dynastic period, or what we call Egypt of the Pharaohs. So this would be around 3100 BC. Some people think it's much older, but 3100 BC still is more than 5,000 years ago. And it goes from 3100 BC, in my chronology, to 332 BC. And what happens in 332? Alexander the Greek comes. And in 304, one of his generals, a man named Ptolemy, founds a Greek dynasty. And this dynasty lasts from 304 to, I believe, 30 BC. And the last, or before the Christian era. And the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty is the famous Cleopatra VII. And she commits suicide rather than be captured by the Romans. From that point, from 30 BC to about 500 years into the Christian era, Egypt is dominated by Rome. Now think about that. For 500 years, Rome dominates Egypt. And Egypt is kind of like a granary. It produces a lot of the grain that the Romans use. Then there's a period where the Byzantine Empire incorporates Egypt. And then in the 7th century, the Arabs come, and they've dominated Egypt for the most part ever since then.
Wow. How much time do we have left?
We have about 10 minutes.
Okay, what else do you want to talk about? I don't have any more questions.
It's up to you. If you want, we could go back and I could show more photographs, or I could just talk about some of the other scholars or some of the other aspects of Nile Valley civilization.
Are you independently wealthy? Are you able to travel as much as you want to? How are you doing?
No, my brother, it's a struggle. But if you really want to do it, you find creative ways. And I've been to Egypt 25 times. And most of the time that I've been there, I've either led a tour group, and that means if you get enough people, you're going to get your expenses paid at the very least. Or I've gone as a historian or a consultant. So people have brought me over there with tour groups, and I would lecture to the group. Another way you might do something, for example, I mentioned the cave complex or the coral cave, the coral cavern at the beginning of the presentation. That's in Zanzibar, it's in Tanzania. Well, I had already taken a group to Ethiopia and Kenya. So I was in the region. So it wasn't much for me to fly from Nairobi, Kenya to Zanzibar. And then after that, I decided also in the region to go to another country I wanted to visit, and that was Djibouti. So if you're already in the region, you could save on expenses because you're not flying all the way from the United States.
So you've been to Mount Kenya?
I've been close enough to see it and take good photographs of it.
Do you know the people there that have the superior brain power, the photographic memories and stuff like that?
No, I've never heard of anybody like that.
Never?
No.
Oh, someone's pulling my leg or something, huh?
Maybe. That's one of the beautiful things about firsthand research and seeing it for yourself. Now, there's two things. First, there's nothing like when you're in a discussion with someone, being able to say, well, I was there. You may have gotten this information on YouTube or Wikipedia, or you read it in a book or something. I went there. I was there. I saw it. I talked to the people. I touched the monuments. I took pictures. Psychologically, that is very, very, very powerful. Nobody can take that away from you. That's number one. And number two, I've been doing this work for a long time, and it is work, but it's a labor of love. It's a labor of joy. I like what I do, and I'm very, very passionate about it. And so that to me is just a wonderful asset to have. So I don't feel like I'm, being exploited or taken advantage. I'm doing what I want to do. And I think that through knowledge of self and spreading this information, you're empowering your community, you're making the world a better place. It's a wonderful thing. And I found my path when I was very young. Some people never find it.
That's true. What about the Dogon?
The Dogon live in an area in a country called Mali. Mali is a very large country in West Central Africa in the area commonly called the Sahel. The tourist infrastructure is not well developed there, and it's difficult to get to Dogon country. I've been to Mali, but I never left the capital. I didn't even get a chance to go to Timbuktu. Mali is so big at that time, I'm talking maybe 15 years ago, that you couldn't drive unless you had just a tremendous amount of time on your hands. And so you'd have to fly. And flights from Bamako, the capital of Mali, to Timbuktu only happen 2 or 3 days a week. The Dogon live high in the mountains. And maybe that is why they are such stargazers. They live way high up, and they're not easy to get to. I know people who have visited the Dogon, but I have not. But it is possible to do it.
What language do they speak now?
I'm sure that they speak French or understand French, and Dogon itself might be a language, I'm not sure, but I know they speak French. Some of the other languages they might speak is Bambara, B-A-M-B-A-R-A, which is another language spoken in Mali and other people in Mali.
So they celebrate the Sirius star, which our sun rotates around, right?
I guess you could say that. What I know about the Dogon is that they became famous because of their knowledge of Sirius B. Sirius B is what's called a white dwarf. It's a star that's imploded upon itself, and it's a star that's invisible to the naked eye. And yet the Dogon, these so-called African primitives, some people believe, have a knowledge of Sirius B that's 700 years old. They know about the orbital patterns of Saturn. And Western scientists have only become aware, as I understand, of Sirius B within the last 100, 120 years or so, and only photographed it, I think, beginning in the 1970s. And so the question would be, how is it that these Africans, considered primitive by many people in the world, have knowledge of a star system that Western astronomers themselves are only beginning to come to grips with?
So do you believe the Nomo, we have the DNA of the Nomo?
No, I'm not sure. What we know about the Dogon is largely through two sources, and both of them are Europeans. One, there are two anthropologists, two French anthropologists. There's Marcel Griaule, Griaule, and a person named Germain Dieterling. Now, together, they went to Mali and they wrote a book about their knowledge that they acquired called The Pale Fox. And then there's another book by Marcel Griaule called Conversations with Ogatameli. Ogatameli was a Dogon elder, and they told them things about the Dogon worldview. Now, it could be that something was lost in the translation, and then even their books, the books by Dieterling and Griaule, and the book by Griaule was translated from French to English. And so in the process of those translations, I'm not sure how much may have been mistranslated. I don't know how much of it is accurate. I don't know how much of it is literal, and I don't know how much of it is made up. European anthropologists have been known to make stuff up. So I think we have to examine that.
Conversations with who?
Conversations with Ogatameli, Ogatemeli, Conversations with Ogatameli. If you just look up Griaule, Griaule, those other books I'm sure will come up. Marcel, Marco, Griaule, I'm not sure what the pronunciation is. And once again, it's spelled Griaule.
Cool. I have learned so much. God bless you for this.
Oh, well, thank you, brother. I appreciate it. I hope it's just the beginning.
Me too.
And I'm here for you. We don't have to wait until next month or next week. If you have a question or something, by all means, reach out. Here I am. Won't cost you any extra. I
Okay.
appreciate it because the scholars need the support too.
Yes, sir.
I don't expect to get a check from Bill Gates or Donald Trump saying, Runoko, keep on going, destroying white supremacy. I'm glad to be of assistance.
Let me tell you what's going on with me.
I'm listening.
I'm an author of a book called Journey into Greater Love. It's on Kindle. It's a screenplay, and I'm making the movie this year.
Good.
Probably gonna have it filmed and edited and uploaded to Amazon Prime Video pretty soon. I'm trying to build affordable, safe housing for people for less than 30% of their income as my 501c3 liberation.org. See what else. I'm a business consultant. I'm trying to work with Roland Martin and Tuskegee right now, but I haven't been able to get a hold of them yet.
Okay.
The way that I structure my businesses is by taking people's subscribers. How many subscribers or newsletter participants do you have right now?
I have a YouTube channel, but it's very, very new. So we haven't even begun to promote it.
What about
I do a lot of interviews like this, but I'm not the producer.
What about the newsletter?
I don't have a newsletter.
Oh, you got to get a newsletter, doctor. That's where your money comes from.
Okay.
So what I'm doing is if I have 1,000 people, when I get 1,000 people, I'm going to have them pay me $1 a day. So the day before, I collect $1,000.
Okay.
I take $300 of that and I give it to one person as a prize every day. The other 35%, I pay taxes.
Okay.
Another 35%, I build my apartment complexes and my structures for the homeless.
Okay.
And then at the end of the year, I give away 13 houses or 13 condos every year.
Very good. It's a great plan, ambitious plan.
Thank you.
So, my brother, I appreciate you. And that ends our session for today. Feel free to reach out with additional questions, and I hope it's not the last time we interact.
It won't be unless I die or you pass.
I don't plan to do that anytime soon, and
Me too.
well as well. Take care, my brother. Happy Black History Month. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.